Hi, and welcome to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast hosted by myself, Kojo Buffum. The podcast is an extension of my recently published book of the same name, a collection of essays, reflections, and poems on a range of subjects, including fatherhood, identity, and music. My guest today is Mokena Makeka. He's a many things and wears many hats influenced by the different spaces, geographical, mental, and physical, that he's interacted with over the years. Coming to prominence in South Africa and globally as an architect, he applies for a love for poetry, hip-hop, Pan-Africanism, and design with an inherent curiosity that takes him down many paths. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Okay, so you, like me, have many labels and titles attached to your name. But it always feels like the starting point was architecture or architect. Where were the seeds of architecture planted?
Wow. I mean, it's such a good question because, I mean, there's different ways of looking at where the beginning started. First of all, I can say with confidence, I first heard the term architecture at high school in Lesotho. My best friend, Tabang Marshilogo, we were doing art together and he was drawing a house. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "That's architecture." I said, "What is that?" So that's the first time I actually heard the word. Needless to say, I wasn't mature enough to really appreciate it at the time. I was quite dismissive of him drawing houses and windows. I thought it was a waste of my time. But if I think about when I was aware of space or aware of the spaces that I was in, that was very early on. Like literally some of my earliest memories are, being a kid in DC and climbing on statues and being around memorials and just being in awe of some of these spaces that I was in, but I had no idea what it was, right? You just see like an amazing volume, huge columns, interesting structure, you're like, whatever. So I think the real transition for it to really sit with me as something that resonated was when I was doing my first year at UCT, and by strange confluence, basically being dared to do architecture by somebody because I was very frustrated with engineering. I stumbled upon the profession, and what I liked about it was that it was 50-50 poetry, abstract, the stuff you can't measure, and then the other 50 is, absolutely forces, physics, chemicals, weight, like there's another side to architecture, which is so pragmatic. And I'm an in-between guy. So I like poetry and I like math. So it was kind of like a neat fit. Yeah.
So, I mean, you went to UCT for what, engineering?
Yeah. So I had an engineering scholarship from Manpower in Lesotho. I actually wanted to be in many other things in life, but the scholarship pivoted me towards electromechanical engineering. That's where they said I should do based on my marks, and I was totally frustrated. And because I wasn't into it, I didn't perform particularly well. I'm one of those guys, if I'm not into something, performance tails off rapidly. So I had like atrocious marks. Atrocious marks, yeah.
So I think to give some background, because you're talking about Manpower, you talk about Lesotho. So first of all, we went to the same high school.
Sure.
But Manpower is the, I guess it's the department that gives scholarships to Basotho kids to go and study. And interesting enough, I was having a conversation with some guys recently because I wasn't sponsored by Manpower, because the degree that I was going to do, they said I could do in Lesotho. And so I suspect there are quite a few people who ended up doing degrees they didn't want to do because that was the only way they could get getting their education financed.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And I think it's good to give that context. I mean, just to be clear, the system in Lesotho at the time, you were told that if you were accepted and you had good marks, that you'd be supported. And I was accepted at a number of universities, but every time I kept coming back to Manpower, they told me I must pursue studies in a different country. I mean, first I was going to do aeronautical engineering in New York. Then they said, no, we don't want to support any students in the US. picked something in the Commonwealth. I got accepted in a couple of places in England, went back there with my papers. The lady was very, very efficient in terms of telling me, no, Ndate Makeka, no. Can you please focus on SADC? I'm like, okay. And mind you, every time you apply, right, you can lose the cycle, right? Because there's a window that you're supposed to get your applications in. So I was like panicking because I was basically late for all these places. Then it was a choice between WITS and UCT. And, you know, at the time there was this huge rush of, you know, everybody in Lesotho going to WITS, and I just wanted something different, you know. So I said, let me go there. But you're absolutely right. I had no desire to be an electromechanical engineer. I just wanted to design stuff, you know, and they said, no, then that's what you must do. So, but I'm glad that you were able to get, I didn't know that they didn't want to fund you, but, you know, anyway, I'm not even going to get down that route, but it's really frustrating because the assumption that what's internal is as good as external, you know, is another thing that needs to be unpacked, you know, so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting in terms of, for those of us who come from Lesotho, and also the years that we came from Lesotho. So, for example, you know, your year, a lot of people are going to WITS, whereas my year, most of the people went to Cape Town. So, you know, so all the Basotho who've been in Cape Town for years were from my kind of graduating class in high school. Whereas I took a year off and I went to Germany. And then when I came back, I also tried to apply for UCT, but I think they wanted to take a break on Basotho kids. So I couldn't actually get in.
Oh, wow.
That's how I ended up in Durban.
Where, you know, it's amazing how life can, like, there's this assumption that we're always in control of our destiny.
Yeah.
But very often, you know, you run as hard as you can, but then you get a bump in your elbow and you move into a different lane and you just got to keep running, right? It's got to keep running. Man. But look, here we are, years later, healthy and wiser than we were, you know?
You know, the one of the words that, you know, that's commonly used is serendipity, you know, which is kind of things falling into place. I'd like to take a step back because
sure.
I know you, so I kind of know a bit of your history. And, you know, you talking about this balance between the poetry and the, let's call it the more formal approach to architecture. When you were growing up, and this is usually my first question, which is, what did you want to be when you grow up? And I know that you grew up partly in the US. And I do feel like that, you know, the juxtaposition of the US and then being back in Lesotho laid the seeds for this connection with a, I guess, a craft and art form that exists in this kind of balance between the purely creative and the purely formal.
Sure. No, absolutely. So I think a couple of things. One is, you know, to accept that at the time I didn't get it, but in retrospect, I look back now and, you know, I grew up in a house of extreme contradictions, right? So like the one layer is, you know, a family of Basotho in the United States, right? Father's an ambassador, you know, doing what he does. But at the same time, you know, Lesotho is, you know, definitely not one of the wealthier countries of the world, right? So when you're in class and you say, what does your dad do? And you say ambassador, everyone's like, oh, wow, like baller. But like, no, there's no balling. This is just, we just live here. We just live here and we're doing the best that we can. So that's like one layer of contradiction. The other layer is, you know, also being the child of, you know, born and bred Africans, right? Like true and true. So they go to the United States in their adulthood, but now they're raising children. So they're trying to impart their values, which are alien to a 5-year-old, you know, a 10-year-old, you know, because the context that you're in is not the same, you know. So I remember like watching, you know, Bill Cosby and the Huxtables, And then going up to my dad afterwards and like, can't we be friends? And my dad was clear. He's like, I'll never be your friend. I'm your father, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and you can't explain that to another American kid. Hey, my dad is not my friend.
Yeah.
What does that mean? It's like, no. It's just one of those things. So I've always been in between. Let's put it that way. Always been in between. Whether it's, you move in one space and someone says, oh, you sound kind of different. Oh, you sound kind of different. And I think that's kind of what made me settle between this thing of, poetry and math. Like, I really like figuring stuff out. I love physics. I got like that nerdy side to me, but at the same time, I love poetry. Like, honestly, like Coleridge is one of my favorite poets. And he's like way, way old school. And then of course there's hip hop also, also in the mix. So I've always kind of gone for the middle zone, being in between, but that's also because that's always where I've been, because I've always had to move to a new place. And I'm the outsider. I have to quickly adapt, quickly make friends, quickly flow. But at the same time, I'm very happy to flow out, because, when I was growing up as a kid, sorry, I'm just going on for a bit. I'm just reflecting. I remember talking to some people and they'd say they'd be in one school, literally from like play school until high school. I mean, I remember I was switching up schools maybe every 18 months or every 2 years. It was like, here, go here and make friends quickly, so I've always been in that homeless space, to quote, who's that famous musician? Ladysmith Black Mambazo and our friend Paul Simon. So I mean, I'm not saying I'm a minor, don't get me wrong, but that idea that anywhere is your home, right?
What was it like coming back? What was it like coming back to Lesotho? Because I know that. So I mean, we went to a school that was unique in itself because we had multiple nationalities. We had people from all over the world, but at the same time, we didn't always make it easy for Basotho kids who had lived overseas and were now coming back and trying to find themselves and find their space within that environment.
Yeah, but that's a very polite way of putting it. Look, I honestly, I think if, without having any sort of, bad blood or bad memories or whatever, the reality is, when you're 13 years old and you're coming to what effectively feels like a new country and you don't know how to, for example, I never kicked a soccer ball in my whole life. I used to play football. I mean, that's what we did. And then first day at gym, someone throws a soccer ball at me. I try and catch it. I'm like, what are you doing? Like the whole, like the, and I'll say this, our people have a very strong passive aggressive side to them. I mean, they might disagree with me, but I honestly, with having visited many people around the world, we have a slight passive aggressive thing about it. And it can be hard in Lesotho, I must be honest. It was hard. It wasn't easy. And then, and also, I think the assumption was that, you see, we're quite sophisticated now. So, if we took our kids to another country and to another school, we'd sit them down and we talk about how they're adjusting and are they making friends. Like there'd be a whole dialogue, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
There'd be an enabling environment.
Yeah.
So this in those days was very much sink or swim. Like, here's your uniform, these are your books, go. Like, and I think. It makes you tougher. I think it makes you even more agile. But when you're a teenager, man, it's doubly hard. It's hormones. It's thinking about ladies for the first time, or men, depending on your preference, or both. I mean, let's keep it open. I mean, it was a curious time. I can say with comfort, like the first 2 years were, it was like being in like a Jim Carrey movie. It was totally surreal. Everything that happened was like, oh wow, really? Oh wow, really? Oh, like it. I felt like a character in a movie, and the script I was not in control of. But things adjust and change, and you find your feet, you get your friends, you find your groove, and also you accept that maybe you can't find your groove in other spaces, right?
Yeah.
You find your mojo. You're like, okay, that's cool. that's cool. I'm gonna do my own thing. Yeah.
How is it then shifting to South Africa, and shifting to UCT? One, you're finding your lane from a, let's say, from a professional perspective, from an academic perspective,
Yeah.
but then also coming to this country at a very interesting time when there was immense transition and upheaval. How was it finding your space within all of that?
I got to tell you, man, it was, so the way to answer that is I want to put into context what it was like being in New York, right? So my dad, like, it felt like every day he was going to battle because he was going to the UN, he was fighting for sanctions. We would often have some, exiles coming to visit us. When people were being killed, not just in Lesotho but elsewhere, like, you'd literally see the expression on my dad's face change. We would sit down and we would watch movies about what was happening. So we kind of had like this mission, so to speak, about getting Lesotho up in the world, but also that was intimately intertwined with destroying apartheid, right? So I had this like very strong affinity and emotional connection because it was, and my dad's house was filled with books from the 60s, 70s, whatever, Black consciousness, Pan-Africanism, so when I came to UCT, there was a slipstream because it felt at home. It was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And obviously, Basotho and South Africans culturally, I mean, there's so many similarities, I mean, there are many dissimilarities, but there's immediately like so much that's in common. So it was kind of nice, actually. It was cool to feel at home, to feel aligned, to feel, I mean, obviously there were other prejudices, right? Because some of our South Africans who are not well exposed to the Pan-African condition would start to think Lesotho is a Bantustan and having to explain, no, dudes, this is not Transkei, right? This isn't some weird invention. This is a separate sovereign state. So there were those moments where I think some of the local South Africans who were given a particular historical view of the rest of Africa, that was a bit of a challenge. But I think it to be honest, I felt at home, at least on that level. I didn't feel at home with regards to music because I was a hip hop head, hardcore from like day one.
Yeah.
And I mean, I left Lesotho as an MC, and I come to UCT, and it's all hardcore Guaito and slick back hair and pointed Italian shoes. So I was like, I couldn't get this because I was like into my Timbs and my baggy jeans. So at one level, again, I didn't fit in, but at another level, it was pretty cool. But that was an interesting period because then I remember when Mischief came out from Chicago and he came to UCT, and people like CeeLo and a whole bunch of other MCs, some of them rest in peace. So we ended up forming our own little cohort of people who were kind of connected to an expatriate hip hop experience. And those years were actually, they were beautiful. They were really, really beautiful. And everybody worked hard, and they were freestyling and making good music, practicing beats. I mean, we were like musical fiends. And what was nice about that was the correlation between that and architecture. Believe it or not, to me, it was like the same thing, because at the time in architecture, there was this movement called deconstructivism. So which is basically the idea of like deconstructing language. And a lot of it comes from, critical theory about how we speak, how we convey words, how we convey ideas, and how does architecture convey those ideas. But hip hop is all about deconstructing language and then reassembling it, right? And reappropriating it and forming something different. So when I was doing my architecture, I kind of wore my MC hat on, and I said, how do I deconstruct colonial architecture and make something that's more African? And then finding inspiration by listening to what Jeru the Damager would do on a verse, and then bringing that back into So for me, it was, I found like a happy medium between music, culture, and what I was studying. and it just happened to work out architecturally. It seemed to produce some pretty cool designs, for which people said, "Hey, that's nice." And I was like, "Okay, cool. That's actually hip hop, but don't need to tell you that."
But I mean, I find that, and you and I had a conversation in front of multiple audiences some years ago.
I remember.
And I
Dope
found,
night.
yeah. So I find there's a beauty in being able to apply the other influences of your life into that space, because like you're saying in the beginning, where somebody's drawing a picture of a house and they say that's architecture. For the layperson, we just look at buildings. Like, we go, okay, well, there's a building, so does the architect then draw the building? We don't even know about quantity surveyors or anything else that goes
exactly.
into it. And what I took away from you all those years ago was a better understanding of things like space, and how each one of these things influences not just how we navigate space, but also our perception of life and ourselves and all of these things. And I found that you took you kind of forged your own path once you finished school, because you kind of went on your own, as opposed to going and working working in a firm. Why did you take that route?
Well, two reasons.
Was it intentional or by accident? Maybe let's start there. Maybe you just couldn't get a job.
No, it was absolutely intentional. I'm ashamed to say it. I was actually hyper cocky. Like, I was like, by the time I graduated, I was like, I got this. like let me do it. Like, get me some clients. And I did pretty well as a student, so that helped to reinforce that. And I was also always working, during my break, right, just to get some bread in the belly during vacation. So I felt fairly competent in a number of ways, and I had a lot of responsibility during my sort of internships along the way. So no, I wanted to be an architect, and I was really hungry to show that it could be done. I mean, just to put it into context, I don't want to sound old or anything, but at that time, there were no Black architects that you could name. There were no Black architects who had won an award. There was no, if you were flipping through a design magazine, it was not associated with Blackness or Africanness, right? Let's be honest. Now, I don't take anything away from the pioneers who came there before me, because they do exist. People like Mpeti Morojele, who also comes from, Lesotho, etc. So we do have those characters, but honestly, they were like the almost like shooting stars. Like, you either you see it or you don't see it. So I had this burning desire to A, show that I could do it, but B, to show that we could do it, right? Because part of the subtext of studying at UCT at the time was this sort of this liberal context, but at the same time, the notion that we are affirming you, so we're letting you study architecture. You're here we're allowing you to do engineering, and I was so mad at that sense of, because you can feel when people think that you're in the room because of the color of your skin and not because of your talent, So I was hell bent on making sure that if I'm in the room, people know that I'm competent irrespective of my race. But not only that, like, okay, if somebody can design better than me, I don't care where they're from, Mexico, Cairo, New York, bring it on, let's draw. So, and that maybe came from the sort of MC battling mentality, right? Like, to be able to step up. So that was it. So, and it's not like I did find a job immediately. I mean, that's a very good question. So I had these naive ideas that because you were good, that you would get work. I mean, that is not the case, So I remember, like, I think it probably took me 18 months before I actually got my first job. I registered myself as a company, as an individual, and subcontracted myself. So everybody said, "Oh, we'll hire you." I said, "No, don't hire me. Hire my company." They say, "Who's your staff?" I'm like, "I'm the staff." because I was dead set on this, and I got nailed on things like pay as you earn and this, because no, well, you're a company, so sort yourself out.
Yeah.
You said you're a company, get your own equipment. So I was really adamant about changing that narrative, and also hoping that by the time I finish in this game, when a first year or an 18-year-old person of color decides to do architecture and they read what it's about, that they don't just see a list of names or faces that they can't relate to, and feel that, okay, this doesn't belong to me, because remember, as young as we are, we're also old enough to know, we're old enough to remember what it was like, that a lot of things it was assumed they were not for us, right?
Yeah.
There's certain things that we'll do, and certain things that we can't cut it. I mean, I remember in third year, I laughed so much. I'm going on for a bit, but you reminded me of stuff. Good friend of mine, white guy, that's totally irrelevant, but relevant. You'll see what I mean. So he had a friend in the military, and this guy was telling him that they don't allow black people to become pilots because they can't see in 3D. Like, this was the actual narrative, right? So my friend is like, yo, hold up. My best friend is like, he's top of the class, and trust me, he can see in 3D. But this other guy, like that. This is not like 1860s. This is like, this is our lifetime. Somebody really genuinely thought that, you can't have black people. I'm fine. I mean, architecture, I'm not flying a fighter jet, but the rationale it's amazing, and that's what it was like. I mean, we've advanced so much, but when I was studying, there was a heck of a lot of prejudice around our abilities, but not even our abilities, whether whether we have something to offer. Does that make sense? Like, it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to teach you Black Africans to become architects, but we're going to start from scratch because there's nothing in your culture and your traditions that's useful for architecture. So we're going to teach you. So that was the other fight, which was to say, okay, we're going to learn this, but actually we're going to bring who we are into the conversation, and our villages and our this, and we're not going to leave that at the front door because we're now being taught architecture. So that was the big fight, actually. The fight wasn't getting into architecture. The fight was the fight to be an architect, but drawing upon your culture for inspiration. That is still ongoing, actually.
The Listen to Your Footsteps podcast is an extension of the book Listen to Your Footsteps, which is a collection of essays, reflections, as well as poems on a range of topics. In this podcast, I chat to Africans around their journey, and they come from a range of different industries and sectors. Where do you feel we are with that? Because it still feels like there's much to be gained from it, but it still feels like it's an afterthought to a certain extent, or it's exotic, or it's an exception. So for example, like Sir David Adjaye, and anything he does, because he's had that level of validation, it's like, okay, when he brings African design and aesthetic into his architecture, it's like, but that's him. What's it like for everybody else? Exactly.
And I got a lot of time for David. He's such a cool cat on so many levels. But we've also spoken about this, me and him. Like, we've spoken about his journey in the UK and how he had to get there, but also how other people probably got, let's say, dissimilar or similar accolades, but probably didn't have to walk the road that he had to walk, and having to justify and explain. And the beauty of his work, and we'll talk about other stuff just now, is that, I personally, as an architect, as Mokena, don't always agree necessarily with how David has interpreted a particular motif or something about Africa. But what's more important is that that's irrelevant, because Africa is not monolithic. Like, exactly. It's actually beautiful for David to say, no, I like what Francis Carey does. I like, and to get to that point where the public accept that, if there's going to be an amazing African architect, you might end up with 3 different expressions, but it's still African. we're not quite yet there. Like some people would say, well, to be African, it must be colorful. To be African, you know, you need to have, you know, horns on the wall. To be African, like all of these things, you need to have plastered, you know, hand plastered walls in the passageway. And I'm like, yeah, it is that and more.
Yeah.
Like don't put us in the box. Of course it's that stuff, but it could be the way we think about our kitchens. It could be the way we think about our bedrooms. It could be the way that we use our living rooms differently to other cultures. You know, like there's so many things which aren't in the surface. So, and I think we've got a long way to go. But I also want to, I don't want to make it sound like it's like a lost cause. There's some amazingly talented architects and designers coming out and just wrecking things up. And also in the fashion industry, you know, people like Makeka and so on. I mean, they're doing what needs to happen in architecture, taking something like fashion and saying, let's take my colors, tradition, modernize it and transform it. So, and I think that if I look now compared to where it was maybe when I finished or when I was studying, I think it's a totally different world. But is that translating down into the way a corporate might decide to do its headquarters? Probably not. Is that translating in terms of how we think about how we design our schools? Probably not. Is that translating into how we think about our hospitals? Probably not. Like you'll find those expressions more in the exotic spaces you describe, like the museums and it hasn't become mainstream. You know, when it's mainstream, we want the Tuscan house. When we want African, we'll do it for the gallery. Yeah. So again, the African is the exotic, and what's normative is European. We haven't gotten to that point where we've flipped it. You know. Yeah.
It was interesting. There was a guy, Christian. I think it's Benny Mani. I think he's from
Christian
Rwanda.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. He's a cool cat. Yeah.
I heard him speak at Design Indaba, and I actually interviewed him kind of later on. And what I found interesting was how he designed a hospital in a rural area in Rwanda, and he reworked the layout of the maternity ward, your wards in general, but maternity ward in particular, because traditionally it was small and dark, and so they were finding that women's experience of a child's birthday, and I'm paraphrasing, and this is just kind of from memory, but he was saying they found that when a child remembers their birthday with fondness, right? So it's a time of celebration. But for the mother, because it was the environment was so dark and difficult, that for the mother did not have the same enthusiasm for the birthday, because it was a trigger. It reminded her of that very difficult period. And he talked about how just by changing the space, bringing in more light, having more windows, changed both the mother and the child's experience, and brought them closer together. Which we don't think about. I mean, as a layperson, we don't think about. I mean, I remember you talking about I'll ask this as an extension, but I remember years ago asking you projects that you are most proud of, and you talked about a police station. And you talked about what the police, just by redesigning and reworking the police station, you changed the relationship with the community. So I'd like you to talk about that, and as well as say if that's still the project you're most proud of.
It still is. I mean, I'll list a couple of other projects which have happened since then, and I'm proud of in different ways, right? So, but just to close the circle on your point about Christian, I mean, absolutely. I mean, he's such an amazing architect, but that's exactly what we do. Is that so? Ordinary people think, okay, how tall is it, and how wide is the room? Can we fit the gurney in? Where's the equipment go? It's a very functionalist way of looking at the space. But I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're obsessed with the next level of question, you know. So, and I think what makes architecture unique is we're how does a house become a home? Is some of the things we think about. How does childbirth not just become about sanitary environments, but an experience. And that's the poetic dimension, which it's sad because we often don't get credit because we're thinking about those things and actually being quite rigorous about it and actually quite concerned. And most people are unconscious of the things that we are doing for them. But if you take it away, they'll be aware of it. Does that make sense? So if I put you in a deep in a slum or a shanty town, you will immediately be aware of the absence of design. You'll pick it up. You'll be like, this is not working. But when design is working, it's invisible. People just feel good, but they don't even realize the space is is playing a part in it. Which is both a gift and a curse, I suppose. Now onto the question of the works that I'm most proud of. I was just compiling some slides the other day for another interview that I'd done, and I probably have like maybe 5 projects that I'm super proud of. And I'll end off with the police station because it's still number one. So I'll start maybe in reverse order. Like I'm super proud of being part of the team that helped make the convention center in Cape Town. So it was a joint venture, 3 architectural practices, the largest building in the city by far, and will probably stand as probably the largest urban building for a couple of years. And that building was, challenging. It's very technical, a convention center. It's also not super sexy. Like people don't think, hey, let's go to the convention center. It's a very functional building, but it plays such a big role in the economy of the city and so on. And its importance to getting, hotels working, making us a competitive destination so I was super proud of helping to build that up. That's probably my number 5. The next project I'd probably mention would be the Silo District at the waterfront. It's a commercial project. Being part of a large team there, including Thomas Heatherwick and others, where I was one of the main designers for the urban planning, and we did some housing there. But it was just a remarkable moment because in many ways that project for me is almost an extension of work I did 8 years ago, where I was lobbying very hard for a museum of design in Cape Town. And at the time, everybody was like, why design? We have enough museums. We don't want to take money away from the National Gallery. This is going to siphon resources from Lotto. Why do you want to focus on design? And at the time, I was really trying to push the idea that, there is art, no question, and I love art, but design is art plus function, and it's industry, it's creativity, it's what we do, right? It's music, it's fashion. It's not pure art. And I said we need to celebrate that. So when the Silo project came about, even though I wasn't designing the museum, but I was involved in the broader, let's call it matrix of stuff, I was proud. And I look back at my design. Well, I have my own comments about my design, and we have comments about what's on site right now, which is absolutely amazing, but different approaches. But I'm proud because I feel like, there's like a spark which starts a fire. There's like the ash which you blow on it and the kindling gets lit. So I'm super proud of that, and I'm proud of the fact that we have this institution now that's a sign of confidence in arts and design. So, but then a project that I would rate above that one definitely would be Cape Town Station. I have mixed feelings about that project only because it's a project which hasn't gotten enough support in terms of annual maintenance. So you can see your vision crumbling year by year when the paint starts peeling and balustrades start to fall and light bulbs aren't being replaced and taps in the bathroom are missing. But at the same time, I'll always remember that building every day, 280,000 people use it to get to home or to get to work. Those 280,000 people are the lifeblood of the Western Cape economy. If the station shuts down, basically there is no functioning economy. and also the desire, and I hate these categories, but I use them just to communicate, but I hope you're with me, right? Like to create a facility which was associated with working class labor and saying they deserve as much dignity as anybody else in the city. So let's invest in them. For me, that was a political project, you know, and I was like, and I still hold that true. So, because, you know, these are our mothers and aunties and nieces who are cleaning people's houses, who are working elsewhere. Some of them are working in corporate offices, but there's a whole question of dignity. So that for me was a big thing, and I'm super proud of that. And then, and it's also the scale. I'm also proud of the scale. The police station I'm proud of because security is something that is dear to all of us. Like, we know that we're in a violent country. We hear about the statistics about gender-based violence. We read about the murder stats. We know we're not in a safe country. We also know that the police have not done the best that they could in terms of their role in making people feel safe. So we've got a problem. And we're trying to fix it. We continue to try and fix it, but we still have a problem. There's huge distrust between communities and police, and there's faults on both sides. So the fact that I was able to make a building that could help one community to feel a bit more comfortable about the police, if you imagine somebody who's been sexually abused or battered or mugged, and the trauma of having to go to a police station and fill out the affidavit, and sometimes to be disbelieved, or there's a long queue, or you walk into a building and you feel as if you are the criminal, right? Even though you're going there for justice. You can't measure these things, but as somebody who's maybe been on the other side of that, or known people who've been on that side, I was super proud to make a building where I looked at it and I was like, if this just makes somebody else's life that much better in engaging with the police, great. But if it also makes the police feel that we value you and you are a trusted public servant and we're investing in you, and if that makes that person wake up that morning and feel a little bit better and probably have less inclination for police brutality at 5 p.m. on a Friday night, all of that stuff, or just make them a bit more calmer when they're going home after seeing atrocities in the day, and now they're at home and they're meant to be normal again, but they've seen so much and there's not enough mental support or therapy for these people. If there's anything I can do in the architecture to help that, if it means deciding that it's going to be white as opposed to blue, and it's going to help, I'm going to fight for the white. So there's also this other side about architecture that I know it's powerful, but I also know it's incredibly powerless. Like no building will stop crime. No building will give us democracy. No building will stop a politician from stealing. No, buildings don't do that. They don't. But they do make you behave differently. It's highly unlikely you're going to go gambling in a cathedral. It's highly unlikely you're gonna decide to make a business deal on the casino floor. The space tells us what we do and what we don't do, and my job is to try and help make spaces to tell us how to be better citizens. That's all my job. Just better citizens, better people. Even if it only moves the needle 1%, and that's my job. The other 50% can be done in Parliament, but let me do my job. That's how I look at it, and that's why those things are important to me, because it's like I never wanted to do architecture just to have fancy houses on the Atlantic seaboard and satisfy my ego about how much money I can spend on a light fitting. To me, it was like, our people need good design, because we've been deprived of it for so long and almost been told we don't deserve it, which is the other part. Like, we don't deserve it, or you deserve it if you're rich. I don't agree that. I think we all deserve a minimum level of good design.
So to start to wind down, because I said in the beginning, you have lots of titles attached to your name, or lots of labels attached to your name, which is,
I hope labels are a good thing.
It's something that I struggle with. It's something that I struggle with, and I've written about quite a bit. But there's architect, there's artist, there's designer, there's curator, there's all of these things. But I know that you also have you have interesting projects that you pursue. You have passion projects that you pursue. That you are, let's see, I think absolute about following it to its conclusion, however long that takes.
Sure.
So what I want to know is, how do you decide on projects within architecture, but also just projects that straddle all of these spaces? I mean, talking about, for example, as a starting point, Mollo Metsi, which is a tequila brand, right? And you've been on this thing. You've been on this thing for what now? It's a good 6-7 years.
Is it 6 now? Is it 6? Well, including COVID, probably 4 or 5. But you're right. It's been some time.
I have the first message that you sent me with all the artwork, literally the artwork.
Oh, snap! You're right. Yeah.
I mean, you basically did everything from kind of A to Z, including how do you grow plants in Lesotho and make tequila.
Or make agave spirit. The Mexicans
make agave spirit. Yeah.
They'd be very adamant about the term tequila. But so it's a very good question. So I'll answer it by saying that we have limited time on Earth. I don't want to sound all spiritual, but I really believe that, and I think that I'm of the opinion that there are certain things that I'm aware that I will not finish, and I'm humble enough to accept that. There are certain things that I need to do so that my children or somebody else's children could be inspired to take forward. It's a bit like that museum project. Like, you do the spark. I didn't end up designing the Museum of Design. Somebody else did, but basically, you could almost genealogically trace, those origins, partly to what I did and maybe a couple of other people around the time. So that's the first thing. So the one is actually being humble about whether or not you're going to finish something actually gives you courage. Because I think so many people don't start stuff because they're worried about failing. I'm more worried about not producing. I'm not worried about failing, or it's like, I want to produce. So I will, and what I find interesting about some of those projects is I actually shelve them, to be honest. Sometimes I'm like, it's not a good time. The universe isn't aligned. It's COVID, it's this, my interests have shifted. And then 6 months later, somebody will call me and say, hey, what did you do with that project? I'm like, well, it's on the shelf. Can't we do something? So, and that's when I resuscitate them. So one thing I want to say is that I don't try and force things too much. I'm very much about put something into the universe, see what happens. And if it's not the right time, I chill. And then it comes back. I mean, for example, I've picked up on my writing phenomenally in the last year and a bit. I wrote quite a bit, like about 8 years ago. I stopped writing entirely. And then I picked up the pen. I'm like on my 5th manuscript. I'm working on the graphic novel. I'm working with artists on the visualization of some of the characters. We've written a script. So I think I mentioned this to you. So we're thinking quite hard about how do we pitch it to media houses. And that's something which I had shelved for like 5-6 years. Now, my hope is that when I die and they're describing what Mokena was doing or whatever, or my kids are, checking over my old sketchbooks or the stuff, they'll be like, this dude didn't waste his time, right? Like, he didn't waste his time. Like, he didn't win everything he started, but he didn't waste his time. He built, he did buildings, he did this, wrote music with his friends. Here's some of his writing. Because again, it just goes back to that experience I had going to UCT in first year, and you're walking down the passage at the time of engineering. They used to have all the photos of the previous graduates of engineering, and you'd walk down and literally year by year, decade by decade, and you hardly see anybody who looks like you. So I was like, you know what, I got to change that. So I want to be prolific in as many spaces and places as possible so that we change the complexion of what success or even failure looks like. And that's why my background right now is, Black Panther. I mean, it's not just a movie for me. It's an idea of that we have something to offer the world. We are not here to take from the world. We're here to add value if you see our value in a different sort of way. So yeah, I do wear different hats. I'm also, frankly, intellectually greedy. So if there's a problem or a challenge, I do get excited by difficult things, and it keeps my brain busy. I suppose that's it. So between the graphic stuff, Mulomiti, which, recently a colleague of mine was like, when COVID comes down, let's really talk about it. I had some investors from the US coming back. I was like, guys, I shelved this thing a year and a bit ago. And they're like, no, we want it. So I'm like, okay, cool. I'll post some images. So I think a big part of the narrative is not being afraid to, it's kind of like being a serial entrepreneur. It's like you project the idea, you see what lands, you move, you try, you move. And just having the courage to reinvent yourself is something that I think we as Africans need to claim, because all too often we're told what we should be. We're told this is what you must study. We're told you must do this. You must work for this one person. You mustn't do this. You shouldn't divorce. You shouldn't, like, there's a whole lot of rules, which some of which are there to help us, but some of them just kill our dreams, right? So I'm like, you know what, I'm going to try things out. So
what I like about it is it's not the whole we have the same 24 hours as so and so, which then ties the, let's call it, success of it to a material thing, right? Because I mean, I do the same thing. Like so there was a life coach I used to see, and he likened me to he was like the Russian guys at the circus with the plates, the sticks and the plates. Where the guy puts a stick down, puts a plate on top and spins it, right? And then puts a second stick down, puts a plate on top and spins it. And then by the time he gets to like the fifth stick, the first one is starting to wobble a little bit. So he spins that to keep it going. And he said to me that was my problem. Like, I have so many plates spinning that I'm not really doing anything with it. And what he made me do was go through an exercise where I decided on the things that I felt I wanted to pursue. So the things that I was happy to put on hold, but also the things that I'd never do. Like, to kind of go, well, if I'm going to be honest with myself, in terms of my list of priorities, I'm never actually going to do that. And if somebody else does it, great. It's like, it's great if somebody else does it, but I'm not going to sit there and go, oh, that person did it and is extremely successful. Now I should have held onto it and done it.
The good point.
Which is I think a mind shift, like you're saying, for us as Africans, that we can navigate the different spaces and you follow it to its conclusion for you. Not correct. Not the conclusion that society says, okay, if you start this, you must be there to finish it and reap all the rewards of it. It's like maybe your job was literally just to lay the spark.
No, absolutely. Bro, I mean, it's such a beautiful way of looking at it. I mean, I think it's profoundly African, because we are creating legacy for a future generation of Africans who will be liberated from the prejudices that we had. Our parents dealt with, let's say, direct prejudices, and our parents is probably, so it's like basically it's a cascading thing now. So I think our generation is here to let people know that they can dream as much as they want. I look at maybe the next generation, and maybe they're the ones who unlock the dreams. I think of, Serena Williams' dad, I mean, despite the age gap, I imagine that what we're talking about is probably what's going on in his head, or what was going on in his head. Yeah. He's not going to play tennis, but he's going to create the framework to allow his child to imagine that they can be anything that they want, which then allows the Williams to know that they've done it. Their children will be free, well, probably burdened because, hey, my mom is, Venus Williams. But the point is, it's like an increasing liberation of the mind,
Yeah.
and I think our generation is like, you know what, we can think differently, we can do stuff differently. I might not be Rockefeller or an agave spirit mogul in my lifetime. It's okay. It's like the founder of Tabasco, passed away, made this pay, I don't know how many bottles he made in his whole lifetime, and now the factory makes more in a day than they did in his whole career, right? But he knew he was just making Tabasco. So yeah, I think we're that developmental generation that I think it's our duty to be as open-minded as possible, because our parents were told, you'll be a doctor, you'll be a lawyer, you'll be a this, you'll be a that, you'll be a cleaner. Like, I want to decide that for myself, and for my kids to realize it's not just a statement. It's like, no, actually he did do it.
Yeah.
And then he stopped and he moved on. And the house didn't go fall apart. Nobody said that, oh, like, for example, me kind of transitioning out of architecture now, which I do a little bit of, but my career is really much more in strategic consulting at a global scale at an amazing firm. And so my architect colleagues are like, oh, we thought that you'd be an architect until you die. Like that was I said, well, the training is in me, and I'll always design the art thing now and again, but I'm not going to be 95 years old, sketching doors. I mean, no, I need to be doing other things, right? Yeah. I need to be collaborating with those guys. So I think it's our job to consistently transform. At least our generation's job. Yeah.
So it was always interesting for me in high school. I had an epiphany, I think, like Form 3, Form 4, in reading about colonialism, like in history, because I enjoyed history. And looking at my father one day and realizing that my father was in his mid to late 20s when the colonialism that I was reading about in books that seemed so far away ended. Like, Ghana gained independence in 57. Lesotho was, 66? Like, our parents grew up, the stuff that we're reading about in a book where you're just like, wow, like, it was really hectic in those days. And they were well into their adulthood when those things ended. And like you're saying, I believe that we're all links in a chain. And I believe that the job of each generation is to take a step up. So my father took us a step up, and I launched from a step higher than he started from. And my job is to do the same thing for my children, so that they're not starting from where I started. They're starting from a step up.
Yeah, no, completely aligned. I mean, I remember, just to latch onto your story also, talking to my dad, and he was telling me about when they were deciding the Lesotho flag. It sounded so abstract. And he said that they were like, not quite competitions, because it wasn't the same sort of thing, but they were like discussions. Like, what should our flag be? Like, can you imagine, like, debating and then there were like rallies and things happening. And then I remember talking to my late grandfather. Well, my father's also late. My late grandfather was like telling me when they tried to introduce a tax on radios in the village. This is like in the 1930s, because we were discussing TV licenses and why it's so absurd. And he's like, listen, we refused to pay radio taxes in the 1930s. You're not going to find a herd boy paying a tax for his radio. So he was like, so we're not paying TV license taxes because it's the same thing. It's a radio wave. But to talk to somebody who's been, can you imagine the level of tech at that time and what they did to get their children, and so I don't mind if I'm inspired by so many things that my grandfather did, and some of them were fairly perhaps ordinary compared to today's standards, but they were extraordinary in its own time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also what we got to do. We just got a big story. I think the story of your dad, Lesotho, Ghana, moving around you, like just the ability to move. Because remember, there's a time that Africans couldn't even really move freely, like just to be able to immigrate was like, wow, this, now it's normal, so everybody steps up, and I think it's a beautiful thing. So I don't mind being, having many different labels. There'll be the odd people who wonder, where did this go? Why didn't this finish? What happened? I'm like, no, that's not my journey. My journey is not to do one thing and one thing only. My journey is to show how many things we can do, and also to find out my limits. I mean, that's another thing. It's like, I want to know my limits, whether it's physically, mentally, business, whatever. That's why discussing how to grow plants, became a quasi-agriculturalist as well as a distiller, became an expert in glass making, arguing with glass makers in China about how thick the glass of my bottle should be, and having a rational debate, like not being crazy, like I have facts, like you will make the glass thicker for this and this reason. And then being with my staff, and they're like, how do you know how to, design bottles? I said, no, I don't. I just read. And yeah, it's nice to have those experiences. I want to be that really cool granddad, who like has like crazy stories by the by. You know what? Sit over here. Let me tell you. Pa, 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 pa. I want to be that guy, Yeah. Yeah, so, but we'll see if I get there. Let me see how quickly I get there, or how slowly I get there. Yeah.
On that note, my man, thank you very much. We could
thank you.
Probably go on forever, but yeah, let's stop this for now, and then hopefully check in down the line.
Absolutely. Now let's stay in touch, and also, yeah, man. You also, I've said this before. I'll just say it again. I mean, you're a proper leading light, doing incredible things. Much respect. All I'm going to say. Much respect. And thank you for having me, man. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Take care, bro.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I enjoyed having the conversation with Mokena Makeka. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do share with other people that you feel may also be interested. Please do subscribe or leave a review on wherever you listen to your podcasts. We are available on a range of platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you will continue to support us as we navigate this journey.